All right. Well, timing's important for Florida State. George, you were starting to fill me in on what has transpired this week and just in the last 24 hours. So, man, we lean on you for the latest so you can get the conversation started here with what is the latest on Florida State versus the ACC.
So just disclaimer, I am not an attorney. At one point in my life, I thought maybe I would be. I'm not the best person at this. We've been lucky to talk to some of the best people like Danielle Kelly and Doug Rohan. And between James and Chris, we've all been able to talk a lot about this thing. We've came a long ways. The latest happening, we were expecting it to be either today or yesterday. You end up yesterday morning it's either yesterday morning or like really late Monday night, something like that. We get the release. FSU, the amended filing comes out. And, as we kind of spoke on before, sure enough, that thing is sharpened to a T. The one particular hitch that caused the Judge Cooper, to dismiss the motion, and which resulted in this amended filing was the wording around jurisdiction in the suit. Judge didn't feel like they were clear enough, and kind of pointing out why the ACC actually did have, they set up shop in Florida. That I don't want to get too deep in the stuff, but there's a long arm statute in particular that they pointed at. So that it was really incumbent on Florida State to fix that part in particular. They offered initially to the ACC and to the judge, look, we will just change the part about the jurisdiction. We will add that paragraph, whatever you want us to do. Revise that one page, and we can just go around and have a court date next week and keep this thing going. Well, the judge and the ACC pretty much both were in agreement. No, we want our 20 days regardless. So you better go take your full 10 days, minus weekends. So Florida State took that. They took that and they amended this filing. They added some details from Clemson's tactics in their filing in South Carolina. They didn't go for damages like Clemson did up there. But they definitely, took a couple of different things. And I'm sure James has, a lot of things he wants to cover on it. I don't want to go get into every little bit of it. But that was the main thing there, is getting that amended filing from Florida State. They also had a meeting of minds. I don't want to say it wrong. It wasn't a full out hearing. But, members of representation from both sides got together yesterday as well. They decided on a court date of June 18th. Which now that Florida State has submitted the second amended filing, that gives them 20 days. Unlike Florida State's 10 days that didn't count weekends, for them, it does count weekends. So really that 10 and 20 days, when you look at it on the face of it, it's a lot closer. So hopefully about the same period of time, maybe 2-3 weeks tops, and we get the ACC's answer and they can have that court date on June 18th. But Judge Cooper's made it clear, if the ACC wants more time, they're going to get it, unless, it's something just ridiculous that they ask for. If they need an extension, they'll probably get it. So we're going to hope on June 18th, but don't be, too miffed if you see that thing get extended one more time.
James, your thoughts?
I think it was a lot of great showmanship. And it goes back, like, as far as the amended complaint, and it kind of goes down to what I've been saying. One, Mark, you got a lot more Seminoles. I was joking with some of them. A lot more Seminoles watch the pod than what are given credit for. I believe it was this time last week. I was at Mike Norvell. I was where Mike Norvell was speaking to the Seminole Club. And I brought our quarterback commit to the paid ticketed function. And one of the things that a lot of lawyers and a lot of people were speaking about was how dumbed down I was able, not dumbed down, how I was able to be able to speak about these legal proceedings in a way that people can absorb it. And they're civil trial attorneys, and they're like, nah, you really landed the gist of it. You just don't have the case law, but you're not trying a case either. And it goes down to listening to Danielle Kelly, listening to Doug, and also just, as I like to joke, we have this thing, the standardized test called the FCAT. You have to pass it in high school in order to graduate. And if you pass the reading portion of the FCAT, then you should be able to understand that this is it's a lot of it's not as ironclad as what people would think it is. And the things that people talked about, the GOR, and you, especially if you use the Big 12, which is basically what our GOR was almost a copy and pasted of, except for the Big 12 left themselves a little bit more ironclad. There's no such thing as an ironclad contract, but the Big 12 used the current media rights agreement and then said future media rights, basically leaving themselves to this. The ACC literally only said the GOR is valid between the ACC and ESPN. What it's stating is that FSU cannot, while they're a member of the ACC, negotiate with somebody else, in particular ESPN, because that would not, as long as they're a member of the ACC. And that's really what they've kind of brought it. They've kind of narrowed it down to 2 points, and two very, very wide and vague points that are going to be hard to argue against in court. Tell us that the GOR, based upon what you say, is between you and ESPN, and we cannot negotiate that as a member of the ACC. But if we weren't a member of the ACC, would this, like, how would it be? Excuse me. We can't negotiate it as a member of the ACC because it would impede ACC business. But if we're not a member of the ACC, we no longer impede ACC business, and the ACC can move on as stated in the GOR. That's one thing. The second thing is about the penalty. Is the penalty overkill? And that's really what the main arguments are with the amended complaints. And I think sometimes when you simplify it, you made it a more complex case, because it's going to be hard with what they've used in what they talked about originally with Judge Cooper, as opposed to what they used in North Carolina, and also what they've used against Clemson for the ACC to kind of get out of that. And I like how Doug put it. The ACC, well, Doug didn't put it. Our lawyers put, we agree, both FSU and the ACC agree to terms. They don't really agree to it, but it was just taking some words and some phrases that they said in court and using their words against them in a creative manner. So I really see all of this going toward, again, as I've always said, going toward they're going to settle out of court, even though the ACC said that there's no chance. But again, that was just a lot during the ACC media days. But I think that was just, again, just trying to stand your ground. But I don't see this going too much longer, because that's going to be tough to win in Florida, the way FSU presented its case.
Facts. That was all facts. One of my favorite parts of it, they even included pictures. As far as the jurisdictional part, the long arm statute, the judge wanted them to readdress in the second amended complaint. I found out stuff I didn't even know, but apparently Florida State, out of their own pocket, had to build like 5 different, big professional, ESPN quality studios on campus in the Moore Center and these different places for all these, ACC, ESPN broadcasts. So in the proof of, along with the fact that, it's all the home games and everything else, that they showed that, ACC does do business in Florida. This belongs in a Florida court. They had pictures of literally all these studios, and it's got giant logos everywhere that says ACC, ESPN. So just really knocked it out of the ballpark. And if you watched or listened or, followed us on the kind of Cooper's demeanor on this particular thing, he never wanted to dismiss to begin with. The only reason we're here is because the Florida State lawyers didn't want to just change it on the fly. They were going to want to actually go in and fix it. He was trying to lean them in a direction where they could have said right there in the middle of court, that's what we meant, Judge, and they'd have been just fine. But they decided to go resharpen this thing, and they dang sure did. As far as the ACC meetings, that was all kind of funny stuff said. Jim Phillips alluded to the February 2025 date, pretty much the cutoff for ESPN to grant the extension, sign off on the extension. To our knowledge, what's been reported kind of across all of media and everybody I've talked to is that it's a single a unilateral decision for ESPN if they want to extend. Jim Phillips, says, oh yeah, it's just a little look in where they can, they'll have an opportunity to come in and tweak a few things if they want to, but no, we're locked in through 2036. But yeah, pretty funny stuff out there.
I was still sticking around ESPN at the time that the ACC network launched. I'm guessing that was about 2018, 2019, in that range. And yes, one of the requirements was, studio facilities built, all the various fields, whether those were baseball fields, soccer fields, softball fields, had to be fiber optically laid out so that they could just go in there and hook up and broadcast from all those fields. And it seems as though 6 or 7 years later that's working in Florida State's advantage. So not to skip ahead considerably, but I'm going to do it, is saw some headlines here in the last couple of weeks concerning the Big Ten and the SEC having to back off if there was any type of contact with Florida State, because technically that would be tampering and they need to stay out while Florida State's a member of the ACC. However, we know from the real world and things that go on that can be avoided or circumvented in such ways. We also know that technically, I'm not talking real world, I'm talking technically Florida State could be exposed to a certain extent if they have to follow through with a court case all the way to the end and not have a home on the other side, settle with the ACC, or come to a decision by a judge, which none of the three of us, from what I remember of our discussions, believe is going to take place. But let's say it does, then having that buffer of time following a conclusion where they are then free to negotiate. I'm just curious about your thoughts about how Florida State in these conferences are possibly in communication, talking. There has to be a general idea of Florida State knowing what these conferences think of them, where they stand, all of that. There is certainly that in play, you would have to think at this point.
Without a doubt. I don't think the initial moves would have been made if Florida State didn't know their worth. I mean, a big part of it is, obviously the common sense thing would tell you that, I think they released the numbers. I believe SEC was $52 million a year, 52.3 or something like that. And then the Big Ten was 60.5. And I believe the ACC numbers are somewhere in the 30s. Like, you can't just, you're not going to just sit there and give that up to, forget your rivals, to Vanderbilt. You're not going to give that to Rutgers. Like, when, that gives them an advantage even over yourself. And it also gives those two conferences an advantage when you look at the way everything is headed, with all the conferences settling out of court, basically, for the House versus the NCAA versus House ruling. So, why would you go? There's going to be a revenue share. So, I mean, you're even the ACC in of itself across the board is sitting there negotiating in bad faith, because you're not even going to be able to pay your athletes on par to what other people's athletes are paid. So, knowing who our athletic director is, and I believe one of the biggest problems with people in general is everybody is reactionary and they only look at what's happening now. And this was probably a move that's been kind of in the works and on the back burner for quite some time. Like, you don't bring in Mike Alford, who has had stints in Big Ten country as well as ESPN country as athletic director or as a fundraiser, and not have connections and not have relationships and not know how to navigate these things. Same thing with some of our other boosters and some of our other guys that are doing these different things. So that this was a strategic move from when they made the first board of trustees meeting, and they laid it out, and even, as I call it, creative financing, showing that we are at a deficit every year, which I always find it funny. There's no way that 500 students, even if all 500 student athletes went to school for free, nobody is creating classes for student athletes. Like we take up probably on average, if some major classes, 3 to 5 slots. That class was more than paid for by the other students. But I think again, when you look at who we hired, from the president to the athletic director to some of the other people in compliance, all of these moves make sense. I personally think they're all moves that that cater toward the Big Ten. But even if a fail-safe situation, which I actually don't think that's a good situation for Florida State. But if you look at the FSU and what they've done with their app, where you can now get Seminole specific information, and not information, but content, and you can pay for it, and you can get it early. I think those are all things that gear toward, at worst, maybe if Florida State, maybe if the Big Ten said we have to wait till 2027 to take you. Those are all things that bode well for Florida State to just go independent for a few years and be able to handle business because they now have the means to be able to make their money. But you don't even own your secondary rights, let alone your first tier rights if you're in the ACC. So I think Florida State would not have made this move without knowing that they would have a golden parachute.
First thing I envision when you say that, James, is scheduling. And since I'm a scheduling nerd and I enjoy dissecting schedules and who has the toughest schedule and the worst schedule and all that business, and I speak Florida State fans, this is not a Florida State perspective. This is just a college football guy. Would love to see Florida State, at least for one season, be an independent and just patchwork a schedule. It would just be interesting to see who they'd be able to pull from different parts of the country. It'd probably be kind of a quirky, kind of an odd schedule, and it would just be fun to see one season like that.
It would be reminiscent of when Florida State made its I hate to say Mike Norvell's
Absolutely.
mistake, but it was because it's funny because a lot of SEC fans always use this crazy comment, and again, it's all for trolling because one, never in the history of the NCAA has a head coach determined what conference they play in. So they say Bobby Bowden said that he didn't want to play in the SEC or prevented FSU from joining the SEC because he was fair. Without looking at the year before he made that comment, he literally he played, I want to say it was 5 SEC teams and lost one game. Beat most of those SEC games were on the road. So it's kind of it's always interesting to see that. But, we've had that. That's how Florida State made their name, the Road Warriors. I believe it was 1980. We also had a crazy schedule where we played Pitt, Notre Dame State, maybe it was Indiana, Nebraska. We played this stretch of road games that just made absolutely no sense. You can play it now because you can get a direct flight with a charter, but then they were taking the charter bus. It's just that couldn't have been a fun stretch, but it was definitely tough.
Went to Ohio State 2 straight years because back in 1981-82, Ohio State's not going to Florida State. Florida State had to go to Ohio State, beat them 2 years in a row in Columbus.
Any place, anywhere. That was the motto back then. Mike Norvell's getting back to that same type of thing now. And yeah, I agree. Who wouldn't want to see the old Metro in every sport but football and FSU out here doing their own damn thing? That'd be great for a couple of years, but it speaks kind of to the allure of the Big Ten because even in the Big Ten, you have that feel. Because Florida State's going to play Florida, maybe another SEC team, whether it's in a bowl game or at the beginning of the year. And then you look at Oregon and USC and all these other teams in the Big Ten. It has that national feel. I think all arrows point there. I think we're all in agreement. When you read all the different tea leaves, AAU membership, FSU pushing for that, all the medical research, the building's already put into motion, the funding and the plans to build them, sending players for 2 or 3 years now to this Big Ten leadership, conference. It wasn't a couple weeks ago. Mike Alford, is in Chicago, where the Big Ten headquarters is, and like you alluded to, whether you yeah, there's not going to be an email trail. There's not going to be a signed thing, even maybe not a handshake. This is our deal. But yeah, I think there's an idea of, the level of interest, mutual interest between the two parties. I have no doubt behind the scenes. And at the end of the day, even if there isn't, say everybody's right, and they have even, Florida State just really believes in their brand that much. Well, at the end of the day, when Florida State gets clean when they leave, yeah, they are that. They can be that cocky. If you're the SEC and the Big Ten, if you're not like bidding over Florida State and the rights to add them with where we are in college football, yeah, I don't. It's just not something that would happen. So I also want to back up a little bit to what James was talking about with that NCAA versus House settlement. That was another piece of breaking news that came out last night. Like in the evening, we got like official confirmation that, yeah, the ACC conceded. They agreed to it. They signed off on it. So that is yet another ace in the hole when Florida State's talking about the breach of fiduciary duty by the ACC. All these different things. Well, you accepted less playoff spots. You accepted less money from the playoff committee. You've pretty much said you're not a Power 5 anymore. You've conceded that. You see Michael Alford on Sirius XM talking about the fact that kids knew. They're telling, he's talking to a kid and he said, yeah, we didn't make it. And then you get there this morning and you see who the person is from ESPN, and you obviously know you didn't make it. You got the new guy. Meanwhile, Marty Stewart is in Alabama, and it's just really tough. So yeah, I love it's just they keep stacking. They keep stacking, and that whole ironclad thing. I made a comment on Twitter, I think, or something. It's rusting away, and it's rusting away fast. I think kind of the amount of time. I think I agree with, like you said, all of us. Is this thing going to get settled? Yes. I don't think we see a fruition. I don't think we see an ultimate judgment. I think we've seen more appeals coming. We're like basically starting back at square one now that we've got Florida State's admitted filing. But yeah, lots of new stuff coming out.
Jackson, we appreciate you being in the chat and dropping the links for James and for George. And so it's on the screen right now. It's also in the chat there, all of the Renegade Report links that you can go right to, and Den Media Group's in there as well. So just, Jackson, we appreciate that. So just getting back to what you both brought up that was nailed down this week with the ACC signing off on the settlement with the NCAA. The NCAA is reminding me of a number of examples we could use from 20th century world affairs and wars in which they're fighting so many losing fronts on so many places at the same time. Man. So let's not confuse everybody out there. The pay for play, we could get into that, whether we have time this week or at another time that's being projected right now to come to a closure here very soon, that looks at $17 to $22 million that will need to be distributed among revenue, television, gate, and otherwise to players on each major college football team or sports program, I should say. And then a lot has to be determined there. I made a list of questions I have that I'll probably produce a video that I won't have answers for, but I'll say I've got these questions. But getting back to the NIL portion of it, there's a retroactive figure of $2.7 to $2.9 billion that is going to have to be paid to players going back 10 years. So James, first, our apologies that it doesn't go back about 19 to 22 years to catch you. So unfortunately, you don't get a check in the mail. But we'll start with you, since you did sweat and toil on the field, and this does involve you in regards to the NCAA coming to a settlement with the Big 12 and the ACC at this point, and they're all going to comply in terms of back pay for NIL and a plan moving forward where the schools are more involved with NIL.
It reminds me of how the video game got put on hold for a couple of years. But I think I don't remember if it was between $3,000 and $5,000 that I got for the video game. So, but I was okay with that. Even though I missed it. I can't wait, and I paid the $150 to get it early. So I can't wait. I haven't played a video game since NCAA went off. So But I think it's all going toward down this hill. And what's funny is we talked about this at my Gator Bowl meeting on Thursday, and it was they had to settle because were fighting a losing battle, and if it had went to court, they said the number would have been like $5 billion, up to $5 billion. So settling for the money that they settled for was definitely a break. But I think it's going towards these guys are going to be employees. And the reason why they didn't want this to happen is because, like, say for guys like me, who I know I have one, well, they called it mild concussion, but I have a concussion document. I have had hand surgery. I had shoulder surgery. All of these things I got while I was playing football for Florida State. And if they retroactive say I was an employee, any injuries that I have or anything that I have moving forward that's sustained with that, I would be able to go back and maybe get workman's comp, or they would be on the hook to be able to provide some semblance of relief as I go forward. And you can see how the NFL had to, when the NFLPA formed and got stronger, what the owners had to go back and retroactively do for former players. But it comes down to, if they could have really just, if they would have just done the right thing, this really wouldn't have been to this point. Like, you didn't have to pay this much. You could have paid something, and I believe it would have delayed. It probably would have. We will always come back to this, but I think it would have kicked the can down the road for another 2 decades. And we see it with Big Pharma all the time. When they release these medicines that they know have side effects, they look at the fact of, all right, we're going to make $10 billion off of this. We may get sued, and we may have to settle for $4 or $5 billion. But we made out this much money, so the ends justify the means. So, like, to me, I would have just paid every player $36,000-$40,000, or just treated them as an OPS employee. I don't know what they call it in other states, but state of Florida, they have this thing called OPS. It's basically a temp worker. You come in, they pay you a little bit. You don't have really any benefits, but you are an employee of the state of Florida, and you could have done that. And I promise you, like, every school, every state has something like that. This would have probably been a lot easier. But everybody, and when you think about it, the NCAA is ran by presidents. You mean to tell me 140 of the smartest individuals in our nation that run universities, institutions of higher learning, could not get together to come up with some kind of plan to be able to circumvent all this? And the answer is yes, they could have. They just felt that they had this thing and nobody was going to change it. Well, now when you're paying coaches $10 million a year, 12, which is going to probably be, we're going to see for the first time a coach get $15 million in the relative future. And you're going to see colleges sign these, the next Big Ten deal is going to be for $2 to $3 billion, like whenever they finally do it again annually. You got to stop saying this is amateurism. And people are saying they crave that. This ain't been amateur sports since Bobby Bowden got paid $2.5 million a year. And I love my coach, but, like, at the end of the day, look at what other I coach amateur sports. I get paid $1,440 the Wednesday before Black Friday every year to coach football in Duval County. So that's amateur sports. Like, it ain't millions.
Yeah, there is no comparison of another sport, college sport, to where it has a legitimate, like, I don't know what the split is. The NFL is a bit more global and less regional than college football. But, like, half the people I talk to, they prefer college over NFL. And the level that it's gotten is, like, unreal. It influences the NFL game to a high degree, to where they're having to kind of, mold. You see a Lamar Jackson go to the NFL and they build offenses around him. But getting back to the what you guys are talking about, about $2.8 billion, almost $3 billion that the NCAA has to come up with. And what really stuck out to me, and where it ties in for ACC, and the fact they, agreed, signed off on it, conceded, whatever you want to call it. $155 million. It's the second most behind, I believe, the Big Ten, ahead of the SEC. That the ACC is going to have to pay out of their part, which is unreal. And the reason for this is because the college football playoff and things of these nature belong to ESPN, whatever. So that isn't counted. It's all NCAA stuff, and the ACC kicks ass in the basketball tournament. So that's how we're so high up on the list here, is how it was explained to me from what I read and looking at the numbers and things. But it's just a further spit in the face for a Florida State, a team who brings you the bulk, the highest percentage of your revenue, of your viewership, of your platform, over half your championships or exactly half your championships, whatever it is, you're already toting all this weight. That's your argument. You're pretty much pandering to the bottom 8 to 10 schools of the conference. You're doing all this. And so on top of it, you get screwed out of the playoff. You get snubbed from the playoff. You get all these less rights in it. You don't get as much money there. And then on the NCAA side, you're getting penalized more than anybody outside of the Big Ten, who has, it's a totally different ball club. They have double, triple the money at this point in time. So yeah, it's just another layer, another smack in the face, just another reason that Florida State has to get the heck out of Dodge. And whether it's the SEC or the Big Ten, like we believe, it's coming. It may be 27, like James alluded to. Maybe it gets pushed back, but that whole 28 through 2036, it's out. It's never going to happen. Whether Florida State has to go independent or try to move up to the NFL, I don't know what they got to try to do. But they won't be playing in the ACC in 2020. I'd be willing to bet pretty much any amount of money on that.
Follow me on this point. I'm going to make one defense for the NCAA. So nobody throw rocks at me, tomatoes, or misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm not excusing them in any such way. Or as James put it, the 140 presidents that run these universities, that they know the law and they know what's right and they know what's business and what's not business and what passes for business. And this a long, long time ago became a business. However, the one thing that I will say is that I think we would agree that there are very few visionaries in life. Most people react. They respond to situations, to crisis. They don't look ahead and say, look at the tea leaves, look at what's going on here. Let's get in front of this and put a plan in place. If they're getting paid, if they're comfortable, if they're fine, if their institution, their organization, their corporation, their business, there's a zillion examples of this in life where, hey, it's working right now, we're good. And this started off very much as an amateur situation. If you take it back to 1920, 1930, 1940, it's an amateur sport. It's an extension of college life, of the university. Guys are just playing because they're the best guys that can play football, and it more and more. But, you got 5,000 people at the games, then you got 20,000, then you got 30, then they're paying money, and then boom, there's something called TV that hits in the 1950s. Oh, you put these games on TV. Somebody's making some money because they sell ads. So, well, we don't need to pay the players. They get a scholarship. They're fine. They eat well the day of the game. And it just continues. It's a academic model, but it becomes a business. And it didn't become a business one day. It evolved as a business, bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger throughout the decades and generations. And it continued to be within an academic model. And it just flat out doesn't work.
I mean, that's a great timeline of events. I mean, there's no argument there, but the argument here is that line is passed a long time ago. And yeah, there's no doubt it's a collection of the presidents, just like the ACC, where Florida State and Clemson and North Carolina are kind of different. They spend a different amount of money. They do these different things in football compared to the rest of the conference. That's why they got to get out. When it comes to the NCAA, yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you said. It's just when you have power, when you have everything's running, you got all these tons of millions of dollars that's working. These universities, every single one of them, when you look at how much money they had, like James was saying, they could afford all of these if they just think. I think it was TJ or Tony Altimore that said, basically, if they spent the minimum, like what the leading economists say, like you should spend of your coffers, the minimum, if they invested that each year, they could basically, with the profits, pay everybody's tuition. Nobody, period, would ever have to pay tuition again, and they would still be raking money in hand over fist. So yeah, it's just, when did it turn from amateur to professional? who really can say? But to a point now, where it's come up against the wall, and it's the iron amateurism. It's over. There's more important things. They're not having presidents come and give big speeches about amateurism and stuff anymore. It's pay the kids.
And certainly, I wouldn't even argue that it became a professional sport 10 years ago or 20 years ago. No, we're talking more like 50, 60, 70 years ago. Certainly,
Yep.
again, television, let's go back to 1970. Games are on TV, not every game like it is now, but ABC showing double headers, and there's games on other networks. They're making a ton of money even in 1970, and places all over the country like Ohio State, Michigan, and others are selling out 100,000 people, or probably more like 85 to 90. I know my attendance figures. Yes, 50 years ago, still, that's a lot of money. So even 60 years ago, it was a business. Now, would those guys have been making a ton of money as much as today? Of course not. But relative to the times, yeah, it's been a business for a way long time. This is well overdue.
One of the things I did when I was in sports management in college, is I wrote a paper about what the pros do when they innovate. Innovation normally occurs at the pro level, at least in the sport. Then what ends up happening is what happened on the pro level gets pushed down to college after about 5 years. What happened on the college level gets pushed down to the high school, and then so on and so on. And you're actually starting to see that on the business side of it. You're seeing televised games, and a whole bunch of a lot of different things. So it's just, I think there's ways to get around things and still keep it pure. I actually don't mind any of the things that are happening now. And that's probably because I cover the NFL. It's not the NFL. It's not going to become the NFL. The NFL is literally, every time I do, it's less than 2,000 people at any given time play football in the NFL. So that's why it will never be the NFL. Like, I don't think people realize how good, like when you talk to athletes, how good you have to be, or how few people have actually worn a uniform one time in the NFL. It's very few people have the NFLPA card, living or dead. But college still have this purity. It'll still have some of the things. It's just it'll just look different as things change. And when we think about it, it's changed with our American values. You can no longer just say the college degree is what it is when a college degree isn't worth the piece of paper it's printed on. College degree used to let you make exponentially more money than the next person. College degree, there's a person who has a higher level college degree than I do serving me my Grande Nitro cold brew at Starbucks. And while I'm not saying that as a flex, I'm saying that as education isn't worth as much as your network is. And now I will say that's really where they missed the mark on it. My degree at Florida State means absolutely nothing as my time at Florida State, who I met at Florida State, and what being at Florida State and being good is. But they don't even know how to quantify that at this juncture. So like it's like if they were able to say, and now the Big Ten, this is why I like the Big Ten. Big Ten, SEC too, but Big Ten does a really good job of hiring players that are qualified. Things like terms like diversity, equity, and inclusion get tossed around without people realizing it happens every day in everyday life. Like you get hired. Like if I know you and I have something, though you're qualified, you might not be more qualified than somebody else, but because you know me, I want to hire you because I have a familiarity. It's not about what you know sometimes as much as who knows you. And that's kind of where college football has moved and changed. But in that, there is a value in your branding. And that's why they're paying athletes. But it died along. But I agree with you, though, Mark. I don't know. I wouldn't go as far as to say 50, 60 years ago, but I would go as far back to say 30. I would say like the mid-90s. Would that put us in the 90s? I'd say especially the mid-90s, because when did ESPN start doing the Thursday night football? And like Boise State started getting games when they never got games on TV. I think it's like mid-November. We'll have football on every day for like 20 or 30 days straight. Like it's mid-October. will have football on for like every day. Like somebody's getting paid for that. But even then, when it was just the colleges getting paid, you could still make an argument. College coach, like my position coach at Billy Sexton, might have made $90,000. Bobby made 2.5. I'm cool with that. But once we get to, and there's other, I'm cool with what Saban's doing. Once we get to where we're paying off coaches' houses in one location and buying them a new house on top of like paying them $10 million, assistant running backs coaches getting paid $1 million, strength and conditioning coaches getting paid 1.3. Like, all right, if everybody's getting paid this much money, it used to, we can find the money to figure out how to pay athletes, but I do know that there will be some schools that will suffer, but there shouldn't be that many schools in there shouldn't be that many schools in power in D1 anyway.